Welcome back. We are continuing this morning to talk about the stunning allegation from the Prime Minister this week that agents of the Indian government may have been involved in the murder of a prominent Sikh leader in BC. The news Monday set off a dramatic escalation in tensions between Canada and India over the rest of the week. Canada expelled a senior Indian diplomat and the Indian government responded in kind. Then India issued an advisory to its nationals living in Canada, warning them of, quote, growing anti-India activities in Canada. The country has also suspended visa services to Canadians so they can't travel to India. So how is the Prime Minister handling the shifting relationship with India, and how does it all fit into the ongoing concerns around foreign interference in Canada? Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everyone.
Hey there.
Good to see you again.
Hey.
Scott, I'll start with you. At the outset of the week, there was certainly some reporting from the United States around the possibility that our allies were not necessarily jumping to our defense where this accusation leveled against India is concerned. The past few days has kind of seen an evolution in that. The White House in particular has come out and said, no, that's not the case. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesperson, spoke quite specifically about that. What do you read into that?
Well, I think it's unequivocal. And, you know, even at the outset of the week, I know there were these reports and everyone wanted to jump on the Prime Minister. It seemed like in domestic media saying, oh my gosh, you know, was there a misstep here? But, you know, the State Department came out early in the week and said, hey, we've actually seen these reports. Just to be crystal clear, we are standing by Canada. We've heard that reinforced again over and over the course of the week. And, you know, really they've been strongly saying that India ought to cooperate with the investigation. And so I think in diplomatic language, that's pretty categorical. They believe the allegations. They believe the charges. Those are my words, not theirs, but I think that's where we're at. And honestly, I mean, we need to try to contain this situation because it is explosive. It's explosive in diplomatic terms. It's explosive in geopolitical terms. It's explosive in economic terms. But the longer it goes on and the more belligerent India is, I think the more bad it is for India. I do not think they're on a good path because, frankly, people know what the truth is, and I don't think that that's going to work out in the favor of India.
How difficult will, Kathleen, containing this be in the interim between when and if, I should say, a charge is laid, for example, or the investigation comes to a conclusion? Because what we have seen over the past week is really an escalation in the tensions, right? We kick out a diplomat, they do. We reduce our diplomatic staff. They suspend the processing of visas in this country.
Well, in terms of other examples, I mean, we can look at the two Michaels, how long that took to answer your question, or we can look at Jamal Khashoggi, how long that took. But I think really you've got to look at the example the government took by coming out last Monday and actually coming so forcefully out as Trudeau did in the House of Commons at their attempt to contain it. I mean, let's just rewind tape if we think back to the Chinese interference scandal. And it was bungle after bungle. We saw ministers who weren't reading emails, security emails. We saw, you know, potential victims that weren't told that they were being targeted. This time, the government tried to contain it. And yes, there's a good question to ask whether they were only trying to contain it because they were worried about another media headline from the Globe and Mail and the story being leaked. But they seem to have learned their lesson from the Chinese interference scandal. They seem to have kind of evolved in some ways, and they had the credible evidence. They seem to have done some of the due diligence. We don't know all of it, but we do know, for instance, the National Security Advisor went twice to India to speak with Indian officials. They know they presented the evidence to the Indian government. So some of that work has been done, and I think really there was some vindication at the end of the week for the government when you saw people like Jake Sullivan, who spoke in front of the White House briefing room, and his first question was on Canada. That doesn't happen a lot. And he basically vindicated in some ways the Prime Minister by saying, yeah, we're going to show a show of solidarity and support. We think that, you know, there should be an investigation and the criminal process should proceed.
There's maybe, Corey, right now a little bit less solidarity actually here in Canada. Initially, when the Prime Minister made the announcement, both Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, and Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, got up and you know, expressed support and said, we got to get to the bottom of this kind of thing. It was a very kind of you know, solidified message. The next day, Mr. Poilievre came out and basically asked the Prime Minister to show more of the evidence, show the facts, to present the facts, rather, that led him to arrive at the conclusion he did. What do you think the strategy is behind that?
Well, I think there are going to be, as this escalates, more and more friction points that are going to be quite meaningful for, I think, a lot of Canadians, whether they're people who are planning on traveling to India and now can't get a visa, whether it's trade implications for people who are producing products that are going to be sold in that market. Like, I think there are a lot of risks and downsides as this thing escalates. And so, I think it's the job of the opposition to hold the government to account, to provide as much evidence and transparency as is possible on something like this, because a lot of lives are going to be affected by it. So if you have a really good case, show the receipts.
The government, Scott, says, and I mean, I had the Deputy Prime Minister on my program last week and I asked her about it, basically says that at this point that would compromise the investigation. Where do you think each message sits with the public as they consume both?
Government of Canada doesn't want to be in this position. And, they would have wished for anything other than this. One has to assume that India has been sort of flagrantly brazen in its conduct here. And it puts everyone Johnny on the spot, including, as we've seen, the White House. And so, I hear what Corey's saying, but when you hear the opposition leader saying things like, why doesn't the Prime Minister come clean? With the implication, the insinuation being that the Prime Minister has something to hide, that there's some, cloak and dagger and blame to be ascribed on the part of Canada. Listen, if the charges are to be believed, and I can't imagine they aren't, the fault lies with India. Not only did they do this, but my God, they were dumb enough to do this and create this crisis. So yes, there's going to be consequences, but they're not the fault of Canada. Canada is the country that's been confronted with this problem. It's the fault of India.
Does the approach from the opposition speak to their own deliberations, or do you think it speaks, Kathleen, to the significance of India right now, and that it's not China and it's not Russia, and that even Canada was, up until a few weeks ago, pursuing, for example, a free trade agreement, that President Biden has spoken frequently in the past number of months about the significance of India. Like, is that part of it, or is there a domestic calculation at play?
No, I think for sure it complicates things that India is the world's largest democracy. It's a part of the Commonwealth. These things complicate the nature of us trying to realign geopolitical relationships and have that closer relationship right now with India. But I think that the opposition is on weaker footing than they were in the spring. I mean, certainly the government took a bruising with the China interference scandal, but with this one, I think Mr. Poilievre is on weaker standing, because if he's demanding more evidence, if he wants to see the evidence, if he's challenging the credibility that the Prime Minister says he has in terms of the thoroughness of the evidence that they've presented, then he should, as a Privy Councillor, be sworn in and shown that evidence. But in the past, we know Mr. Poilievre has refused actually to look at the evidence when it comes to the China interference scandal. He said, I don't want to see it. But he could actually, and he should be shown the evidence, as should other opposition leaders like Jagmeet Singh should be sworn in as a Privy Council officer. There are other members of the opposition benches that could be shown that evidence. If the Conservatives don't believe what the Prime Minister is saying, then maybe there should be a case that they should be shown it, like we've seen in the past when there are other high-risk, high-security issues, like, for instance, the Afghanistan war.
Do you think the response, Corey, from the Conservatives would be different in this instance than China? I mean, China was, when the offer of a security clearance was made there, we were in the middle of, gosh, I don't know, months of basically the government refusing to have an inquiry, and then David Johnston being appointed, and the Conservatives had not approved of that process, and so they felt that being sworn in to that information would sort of take away from the argument they were making there. I think I got the back and forth there. In this case, is there more of an impetus, more reason for the Conservatives to say yes to something like that?
Well, I would assume in this case that the evidence must be quite clear to have it escalated to the point where the Prime Minister is talking about it publicly and bringing it up in person with the Prime Minister of India. So, one has to assume, and also, assuming the comments made by U.S. officials are so clear that you're I would think dealing with some sort of signals intelligence where that's connecting them to this. But it's hard to know without the government giving more information. I do think it would be good for the opposition to be read in on that. I think that the challenge last time was that I think the evidence was a lot more vague and a lot more voluminous, and and being read in could be used as a way to prevent the opposition from actually criticizing the government and its handling of the matter. So, I think if Poilievre had to take a choice between the two, seeing it and not criticizing, or not seeing it and criticizing, he'd probably choose the latter. But in this case, I assume there's something there to show.
Okay, on that note, I have to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the discussion. As always, Scott Reed, Corey Tonight, and Kathleen Monk. Just ahead, the 3 things I'm watching for this week. Stay with us. We're back in just a moment.